Hey, buddy, you ready to go? Let's get going. Come on. That's my good boy.
Good boy. Take it. That's it. Good job. You're a good dog.
The groundskeeper at Arlington National Cemetery had seen a lot in his 23 years on the job. He'd witnessed hundreds of military funerals. He'd watched widows collapse onto caskets. He'd seen children too young to understand why their father wasn't coming home. But nothing had prepared him for what he saw that Tuesday morning in November 2019. The sun had barely cracked the horizon when Robert Martinez made his early rounds through Section 60, the area of Arlington reserved for casualties from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The grass was still wet with dew. The air smelled like rain and earth. And there, about 30 yards from the main path, Martinez spotted the German shepherd. At first, he thought the dog was just passing through. Maybe it had wandered in from one of the nearby neighborhoods. But as Martinez got closer, he realized the dog wasn't moving. It was lying down, front paws stretched forward, head resting on top of them. Its eyes were open but unfocused, and it was positioned directly beside a grave that had been filled in just 3 days earlier. Martinez approached slowly. He'd dealt with stray animals before, but something about this one felt different. The dog didn't react to his footsteps, didn't lift its head, didn't even flick an ear in his direction. Martinez stopped a few feet away and read the temporary marker at the head of the grave. Sergeant Daniel Hayes, United States Army, born June 14, 1988, died November 9, 2019. Martinez felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that name. He'd been at the funeral. It had been one of the harder ones, not because of the ceremony itself, but because of the story behind it. Sergeant Hayes hadn't died in combat. He'd died at home, alone, and the cause of death had been listed as suicide. Martinez turned his attention back to the dog. That's when he noticed the faded green collar around its neck. It was military grade, the kind issued to service dogs, and hanging from the collar was a single metal tag with a name stamped into it. Rex. Martinez crouched down and extended his hand. Rex didn't move, didn't sniff, didn't acknowledge him at all. Martinez had owned dogs his whole life. He knew what grief looked like in an animal, and this dog was grieving. He stood up and pulled out his phone. He needed to call someone. But who? Animal control? The funeral home? The family? Martinez didn't know what the protocol was for something like this. So he did what he always did when he didn't know the answer. He called his supervisor. By noon, word had spread through the cemetery staff. A military dog was lying on a soldier's grave and refusing to move. Some of the staff wanted to intervene immediately. Others thought they should leave the dog alone. But everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't normal. One of the younger staff members, a woman named Angela, volunteered to bring the dog some water and food. She filled a metal bowl with fresh water from the maintenance shed and grabbed a handful of jerky from her lunch bag. She walked over to Rex and set both items down a few inches from his nose. Rex didn't move. Angela knelt beside him and gently placed her hand on his back. His fur was cold and damp from the morning dew. She could feel his ribs beneath the coat. He was thin, too thin. Angela's eyes welled up. She'd been working at Arlington for less than a year, and she still wasn't used to the weight of the place. Every grave here represented a life cut short, a family left behind, a promise broken. She stayed with Rex for almost 20 minutes, talking to him softly, stroking his back, trying to coax him into drinking. But he didn't respond. He just stared at the grave. Angela finally stood up, wiped her eyes, and walked back to the office. By the end of the first day, Rex still hadn't moved. The story of Sergeant Daniel Hayes begins 7 years earlier in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 2012. The heat was unbearable, the dust was everywhere, and the enemy was invisible. Daniel Hayes was 24 years old when he deployed for the first time. He joined the Army right out of high school, driven by a combination of patriotism, restlessness, and a desire to prove himself. He came from a small town in Pennsylvania where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest events of the year were the high school football games and the 4th of July parade. Daniel wasn't the biggest guy in his unit. He wasn't the loudest, but he was reliable. When his sergeant gave him an order, he followed it without question. When his team needed someone to volunteer for a dangerous patrol, Daniel raised his hand. And when things got messy, which they often did, Daniel kept his head. It was during his second deployment in 2014 that Daniel met Rex. Rex wasn't a puppy. He wasn't a fresh recruit. He was a 5-year-old German shepherd with 3 years of combat experience under his collar. He'd been trained at La Seekland Air Force Base in Texas, one of the premier military working dog training facilities in the world. Rex had been deployed twice before, once in Iraq and once in Afghanistan. He was an explosives detection dog, which meant his job was to sniff out IEDs, landmines, and hidden weapons caches before they could kill American soldiers. Rex had saved lives, dozens of them, maybe more. Daniel was assigned to Rex's unit as part of a convoy security team. Their job was to escort supply trucks from one forward operating base to another, a route that was notorious for ambushes and roadside bombs. It was one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire theater. The first time Daniel saw Rex in action, he was stunned. They were moving through a narrow valley when Rex suddenly sat down in the middle of the road. That was the signal. Sit means bomb. The convoy stopped. The explosive ordnance disposal team moved in. And sure enough, 20 feet ahead, buried under a thin layer of dirt, was an IED wired to a pressure plate. If Rex hadn't caught it, the lead vehicle would have driven right over it. Daniel watched from a distance as Rex's handler, a staff sergeant named Mike Torres, rewarded the dog with a tennis ball and a few seconds of rough play. Rex's tail wagged like crazy. His whole body wiggled with excitement. To him, this wasn't life or death. It was a game, and he'd just won. Over the next 6 months, Daniel and Rex worked together almost every day. Daniel wasn't Rex's primary handler, but he was part of the team that kept Rex safe. He carried extra water for him. He checked his paws for cuts after long patrols. He made sure Rex had shade during the hottest part of the day. And Rex, in turn, kept Daniel alive. There was one mission in particular that Daniel would never forget. They were clearing a village that had been abandoned weeks earlier. Intel said the Taliban had rigged the entire area with explosives. Rex was sent in first. Daniel followed 10 yards behind, rifle raised, eyes scanning every window and doorway. Rex stopped in front of a small mud brick house. He sat. Daniel radioed it in. The team moved up. They found 7 IEDs inside the house, all connected to a single tripwire at the door. If anyone had walked in, the entire building would have collapsed. That night back at the base, Daniel sat outside his tent and watched Rex sleep. The dog was curled up beside Torres, his head resting on his handler's boot. Daniel realized something in that moment. Rex wasn't just a tool. He wasn't just a piece of military equipment. He was a soldier, and he deserved the same respect as anyone else in the unit. When Daniel's deployment ended in late 2014, he said goodbye to Rex. He didn't think he'd ever see him again. Torres was staying in Afghanistan for another rotation, and Rex was staying with him. Daniel flew home, traded his uniform for civilian clothes, and tried to figure out what normal life was supposed to look like. It didn't go well. Post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door and introduce itself. It creeps in slowly, like water seeping through a crack in the foundation. At first, you don't notice it. Then one day, you realize the whole house is flooded. Daniel came home in December 2014. His family threw him a welcome home party. His mom cried. His dad shook his hand and told him he was proud. His little sister, who was 16 at the time, made him a cake with "Welcome Home Hero" written in blue icing. Daniel smiled. He hugged everyone, he ate the cake, but inside he felt nothing. The first few months were the hardest. Daniel couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in Afghanistan. He heard the pop of gunfire. He smelled the dust and diesel fuel. He felt the weight of his gear pressing down on his shoulders, and he saw the faces of the men he'd lost. He tried to talk to his family about it, but they didn't understand. They meant well. They said things like, "You're safe now and it's over and you just need time." But they didn't get it. It wasn't over, not for Daniel. It would never be over. He went to the VA. He sat through the intake appointments. He answered the same questions over and over. On a scale of 1 to 10, how anxious do you feel? Do you have thoughts of harming yourself or others? How many hours of sleep are you getting per night? They prescribed him medication, antidepressants, sleep aids, anti-anxiety pills. Daniel took them for a while, but they made him feel like he was underwater. Everything was muffled and distant. He stopped taking them. He got a job at a hardware store. He lasted 3 weeks. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The aisles were too narrow. And every time someone walked up behind him, his body went into fight or flight mode. He tried college. He enrolled in a community college and took 2 classes, Introduction to Business, English Composition. He went to the first week of class. And then stopped showing up. He couldn't focus, couldn't sit still, couldn't make himself care about things that didn't matter. By the spring of 2015, Daniel was drinking, not socially, not casually. He was drinking to forget. He'd buy a bottle of whiskey and sit in his car in empty parking lots, sipping until the memories faded. His family staged an intervention. His mom begged him to get help. His dad offered to pay for a private therapist. His sister wrote him a letter telling him how much she loved him and how scared she was. Daniel promised he'd do better. He promised he'd try, and for a while he did. He went back to the VA. He attended group therapy sessions with other veterans. He got a part-time job doing landscaping work. He stopped drinking as much. But the darkness was still there. It was always there. In the summer of 2017, Daniel got a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Mike Torres, Rex's handler. Torres had retired from the Army 6 months earlier and was living in Virginia. He'd kept in touch with a few guys from his old unit, and someone had given him Daniel's number. Torres got straight to the point. Rex was retiring. He was 8 years old now, which was old for a working dog. His hips were starting to go. His hearing wasn't what it used to be. And the Army had decided it was time to let him live out his remaining years in peace. Torres had planned to adopt Rex himself, but life had gotten complicated. Torres had gotten divorced. He'd moved into a small apartment that didn't allow pets, and he was traveling for work almost every week. He needed someone to take Rex, someone who understood what Rex had been through, someone who would treat him with the respect he deserved. Torres asked Daniel if he was interested. Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. 2 weeks later, Daniel drove to Virginia to pick up Rex. It had been 3 years since they'd seen each other. Daniel wasn't sure if Rex would even remember him. But the moment Daniel walked into Tor's apartment, Rex's ears perked up. He stood, he walked over, and he sniffed Daniel's hand. Then his tail started wagging. Tors smiled. He said Rex never did that with strangers. Daniel knelt down and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. Rex leaned into him, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. Having Rex changed everything. Daniel's days suddenly had structure. He had to wake up at a certain time to feed Rex. He had to take him for walks. He had to make sure Rex had water and a comfortable place to sleep. For the first time since coming home, Daniel had a reason to get out of bed. Rex was calm, patient. He didn't demand attention, but he was always there. When Daniel had a bad night, Rex would sleep beside his bed. When Daniel's anxiety spiked, Rex would sit close and lean against his leg. Daniel started sleeping better. He started eating regular meals. He even started going outside more, taking Rex to parks and hiking trails. People would stop and ask about Rex. They'd see the faded service dog vest Daniel sometimes put on him, and they'd thank Daniel for his service. Daniel would nod and say thank you, but what he really wanted to say was that Rex was the one who deserved the thanks. Rex had saved Daniel's life overseas, and now he was saving it again. Daniel started attending a veteran support group that met once a week at a church in town. He brought Rex with him. Other veterans would light up when they saw the dog. They'd share their own stories about military dogs they'd worked with. Some of them had tears in their eyes when they petted Rex. One of the guys in the group, a Marine named Carl, told Daniel he should look into therapy dog certification for Rex. Carl said there were programs that trained veterans and their dogs to visit hospitals, schools, and other veteran centers. It would give Daniel something to work toward, something meaningful. Daniel liked the idea. He started researching. He found a program in Pennsylvania that specialized in training service dogs and therapy dogs. He applied. A few weeks later, he got a call saying he and Rex had been accepted. For the first time in years, Daniel felt hope. But hope is fragile. In the fall of 2018, Rex started slowing down. At first, Daniel thought it was just age. Rex was 9 years old now. He slept more. He moved a little slower. He didn't chase tennis balls the way he used to. But then Rex started limping. Daniel took him to the vet. X-rays showed severe arthritis in both hips. The vet said it was common in German shepherds, especially ones who'd lived high-stress lives. There were treatment options, pain medication, physical therapy, maybe surgery. Daniel didn't have health insurance. He barely had enough money to cover his own rent. But he didn't care. He maxed out his credit card to pay for Rex's medication. He took on extra shifts at work. He did whatever it took. For a while, the medication helped. Rex seemed more comfortable. He was moving better. But by the spring of 2019, it was clear that the arthritis was getting worse. The vet said surgery might help, but it was expensive, really expensive, and there was no guarantee it would work. Daniel started a GoFundMe page. He shared it with his family. He posted it in veteran groups online. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the country donated. Strangers sent $20, $50, $100. Some sent messages telling Daniel how much his story meant to them. Within 2 weeks, Daniel had raised enough money for the surgery. Rex had the operation in June 2019. The surgery went well. The vet said Rex would need a few months to recover, but he should be able to walk without pain again. Daniel brought Rex home and set up a recovery area in his living room. He slept on the floor next to Rex every night for the first week. He hand-fed him. He carried him outside when he needed to go to the bathroom. He talked to him constantly, telling him how strong he was, how proud he was, how much he loved him. And Rex got better. Slowly but surely he got better. By September, Rex was walking again. He was still slow, but the limp was gone. Daniel took him to the park. They sat under a tree and watched the sunset. Daniel scratched Rex behind the ears and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know it at the time, but that would be one of their last good days together. On the morning of November 4th, 2019, Daniel woke up and found Rex lying on his side in the living room. He wasn't moving. Daniel's heart stopped. He rushed over and knelt beside him. Rex's eyes were open. He was breathing, but it was shallow and labored. Daniel called the vet. They told him to bring Rex in immediately. Danny. Elle carried Rex to the car and drove faster than he'd ever driven in his life. At the vet's office, they took Rex into the back for tests. Daniel sat in the waiting room, hands shaking, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. An hour later, the vet came out. Her face said everything. Rex's kidneys were failing. The vet said it could have been related to the surgery, or it could have been something that had been building for years. Either way, there wasn't much they could do. They could try aggressive treatment, but it would be painful for Rex, and the chances of success were low. The vet asked Daniel what he wanted to do. Daniel couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He looked at the vet and asked if Rex was in pain. She nodded. Yes, he was. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about everything Rex had done for him, every bomb Rex had found, every life Rex had saved. Every night Rex had stayed by his side when the darkness felt too heavy. And he made the hardest decision of his life. Rex was euthanized on November 5th, 2019. Daniel held him the entire time. He stroked Rex's head and told him he was a good boy, the best boy, a hero. Rex's eyes stayed on Daniel's face until the very end. Daniel stayed in the exam room for over an hour after Rex passed. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just sat there holding the dog that had saved his life. When Daniel finally left the vet's office, he felt hollow. He drove home in silence. He walked into his apartment and saw Rex's bed, his food bowl, his toys. And for the first time since Afghanistan, Daniel thought about ending his own life. He thought about it all night. He thought about it the next day, and the day after that. On November 9th, 2019, 4 days after Rex died, Daniel Hayes took his own life. His family found him 2 days later. The funeral was held on November 12th at Arlington National Cemetery. Daniel had earned the right to be buried there. He'd served 2 tours. He'd been honorably discharged. And though he hadn't died in combat, he was still a casualty of war. The service was small. Daniel's parents were there, his sister, a few cousins, and a handful of veterans from the support group Daniel had attended. Mike Torres, Rex's original handler, flew in from Virginia. He stood at a distance during the service, hands in his pockets, eyes red. After the ceremony, after the rifle salute and the folding of the flag, after everyone had left, Torres walked up to Daniel's grave. He knelt down and placed something on the fresh soil. It was Rex's old collar, the one he'd worn in Afghanistan. Torres stood, saluted, and walked away. 3 days later, on November 15th, the groundskeeper Robert Martinez found the dog lying beside Daniel's grave. At first, no one knew where the dog had come from, but when Martinez read the name on the collar, everything clicked. Rex. But Rex was dead. Daniel's family had him cremated, so who was this dog? It didn't take long to figure it out. The dog lying on the grave wasn't Rex. It was a different German shepherd, younger and healthier, but it was wearing Rex's collar. Martinez made some calls. He tracked down Mike Torres, and Torres explained everything. After Rex died, Torres couldn't bring himself to throw away the collar. It felt wrong, so he kept it. And a few weeks later, he adopted a new dog, a 2-year-old German shepherd from a military dog rescue organization. Torres named him Valor. Torres had brought Valor to Daniel's funeral. He'd let the dog walk around the cemetery for a bit while people were saying their goodbyes. At one point, Valor had wandered over to Daniel's grave and sat down. Torres had called him back, but later that night, Valor had somehow gotten out of Torres' car. Torres lived only a few miles from Arlington. He'd searched for Valor for hours but couldn't find him. Valor had gone back to the cemetery, back to the grave, and he'd stayed there. By the time Torres arrived at Arlington on the third day, Valor was weak. He still hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk any water. His eyes were glassy, his breathing was shallow. Torres knelt beside him and tried to coax him away, but Valor wouldn't move. Martinez and the other staff members stood nearby, watching. One of them asked if they should call animal control. Torres shook his head. He said he wanted to try something first. He pulled out his phone and played a video. It was a recording he'd taken years earlier, back in Afghanistan. In the video, Daniel's voice could be heard giving commands to Rex during a training exercise. "Rex come, good boy, Rex sit." Torres held the phone close to Valor's ear and played it again. Valor's ears twitched, his head lifted slightly, and then slowly he stood up. Torres clipped a leash onto Valor's collar and gently led him away from the grave. Valor followed, but he kept looking back. Torres stopped and turned around. He looked at Daniel's grave, at the temporary marker that would soon be replaced with a permanent headstone. And then he did something that made everyone watching tear up. He saluted. Valor sat down beside him, and together they stood there in silence. The story of Valor and Daniel Hayes spread quickly. Local news stations picked it up, then national outlets. Within a week, the story had gone viral. People from all over the world were commenting, sharing, sending messages of support. But the story didn't end there. A nonprofit organization that supported military veterans and their families reached out to Torres. They wanted to do something in Daniel's memory. They proposed creating a fund that would help veterans adopt retired military dogs. They'd cover adoption fees, veterinary costs, and training expenses. They called it the Rex and Daniel Fund. Torres agreed. Within 6 months, the fund had raised over $1 million, and in the first year alone, they helped over 200 veterans adopt retired military dogs. One of those veterans was a young man named Marcus, a former Marine who'd lost both legs in an IED explosion in Iraq. Marcus had been struggling with PTSD and depression. He'd tried therapy, medication, support groups. Nothing worked. But when he adopted a retired bomb detection dog named Apollo, everything changed. Apollo gave Marcus a reason to keep going, just like Rex had done for Daniel. Today, there's a bench near Daniel Hayes's grave at Arlington National Cemetery. It was placed there by his family in 2021. The plaque on the bench reads, "In memory of Sergeant Daniel Hayes and his partner Rex, heroes who served with honor, courage, and loyalty." On any given day, you can find people sitting on that bench. Some are veterans, Some are family members of fallen soldiers. Some are just visitors who heard the story and wanted to pay their respects. And sometimes, if you're there early in the morning, you might see Mike Tors and Valor. They visit a few times a year. Valor is older now. His muzzle is starting to gray, but he still walks with purpose. And every time they visit, Valor sits beside Daniel's grave for a few minutes. Tors doesn't rush him. He just stands there, hands in his pockets, and lets Valor say goodbye. The story of Daniel Hayes and Rex is a reminder of something we often forget. War doesn't end when soldiers come home. The battles continue, just in different forms. And sometimes, the most important weapon a soldier has isn't a rifle or a helmet. It's a friend who refuses to leave their side, even in death. Rex couldn't save Daniel from the darkness that followed him home. But in his own way, Rex fought for him every single day. And when Valor laid down on that grave and refused to move, he was honoring that fight. Because that's what loyalty looks like. That's what love looks like. It doesn't give up. It doesn't walk away. It stays. Even when staying is the hardest thing in the world. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out. The Veterans Crisis Line is available 24/7 at 1-800-273-80-255. You are not alone. And to every military dog who has ever served, thank you. You may not wear a uniform, but you are soldiers, and you will never be forgotten.